Thanks for staying with us. It's time to convene the summit. Our guests for today are Rabbi David Spitz, activist for freedom and human rights in China. We have Professor Gong Jiang, the Vice President for Research at China International University in Israel, and Carice Witte, the Founder and Executive Director at Signal, the Sino-Israel Global Network and Academic Leadership. Thank you all for joining us today, and we will be debating a new measure by the Biden administration to curtail trade and technology development in China. Let's take a closer look at what this means for the ongoing global struggle between these two world superpowers.
Behind the handshakes and smiles, a trade war is flaring up. The Biden administration is cracking down on the Chinese economy in what some experts call the most aggressive American action yet to stall Beijing's rise. In October, the US issued new rules hitting hard Chinese firms' abilities to manufacture advanced computer chips. Beijing went as far as to call it technology terrorism. An order to control US investments in China is in the works, as well as potential restrictions on TikTok and other apps. The White House also wants to stall Chinese development in biotechnology and clean energy, which would be harder to achieve since China does not rely on America in those sectors. There's also the issue of convincing Europeans to follow suit, as they're not eager to help rebuild US manufacturing at their own expense. Is the era of cooperation between Washington and Beijing coming to a halt? What will it mean for the rest of the world? And will the gambit for economic supremacy pay off?
So, will these efforts pay off for Washington? Are these measures justified? Carice, we'll begin with you, then Professor Jiang, and finally Rabbi Spitz. 30 seconds for your opening statements in this debate. Carice, you begin.
Limiting China's development is only part of the story. Yes, there are definitely steps that the U.S. has taken that are affecting China's economy and China's tech development already. But the situation with semiconductors is complex, and the ability of the Americans to produce semiconductors is very limited as well. We all know that Taiwan, TSMC, is the leading chip developer and chip manufacturer, rather. And for America to actually stay ahead of the game, right, it's going to not only have to limit the development of China, but it's going to have to, as often been said in the government of the U.S., run faster. How do you do that when you don't have the engineers? There are only 6% of graduates become engineers in the U.S. There are the same number of engineers as there are.
Opening statement, 30 seconds. I'm sorry. That's all for the opening statement. Professor Jiang, 30 seconds, your go.
Yeah, I can understand Washington's perspective on this issue, but in general, I'm also very skeptical about the effectiveness of this schedule, this kind of a strategy. The United States was on the receiving end of these kind of sanctions during the 19th century, imposed by the British Empire, and then you look at what happened later. I mean, technology transfer and innovation in the United States happened anyway. And also from China's own history, we were subject to the Russian technology boycott in the 1960s. Nevertheless, we recovered and we moved ahead.
Rabbi David Spitz, your go.
In my opinion, any pressure that the U.S. will put on the Chinese administration have to be connected to values and to press them to give more human rights and to let people do whatever they like to do, and not everything should be confirmed by the Communist Party.
Right. So now the debate truly begins. So feel free to respond to each other's arguments at this point. Carice, let's go back to you. Is technology something that really the United States can target? As we heard Professor Jiang say, that this is a futile exercise by Washington. Do you think that's the case?
Long term, if the only thing the U.S. does is try to block China, it's definitely futile. Israel developed after the Six-Day War when we didn't get the arms we needed from France, and that started our tech industry going. China has become innovators. They're definitely in the medium to long term going to be able to manage doing it themselves, and that's why I have to repeat and pick up where I left off. U.S. must have engineers. It has to train its people. It needs the talent. In order to have the talent, it has to invest in its human capital. And Americans have to be willing to do the work. I was going to say the same number of journalists as engineers in the United States. That is the core problem.
Rabbi Spitz, I want to ask you, you talked about coupling policy with ideology. Surely this is part of sort of the U.S. effort to block what they see as bad ideology coming out of China, particularly when it comes to democratic processes. But is this the way to go about it? And is that even a desirable way to move forward when it comes to policy?
Yes, I think yes. This is what happened also with the Soviet Union, and they crashed only after also some of economic pressure. So this, I think, have to be done also with the Chinese, but the target is to give the people freedom. This should be the target and not just an economy fighting.
Professor Gong Jiang, do you have a response to those two arguments?
The entire notion of ideology, I think, is totally a nonsense, because the United States dealt with monarchies, for example. It established allies with Saudi Arabia and a couple of other monarchies in the Middle East. And also, the idea that this ideology or this religion or this faith is better than the other is total nonsense to me. I mean, we have, sort of, in some people's eyes, we call them extreme religions, okay? In other views, they are the righteous things to do. So, I think this whole notion that one country can monopolize on an ideology, on a faith, on or religious belief is just total nonsense to me. And the United States' actions in the past speak for itself, that ideology has never been a lightning rod that guides the United States' foreign policy.
Carice?
This is not about ideology. This is about global governance. China has said it wants to reshape global governance to better suit China's interests and China's goals. And I think what the rabbi is referring to is that there are many actions taken in China that don't coincide with Western values regarding freedom of speech, freedom of protest, and a lot of personal freedoms. China has a different definition of human rights, and they can have any definition that they want. The problem that the East and that China faces, or with the West or with the United States and democratic countries, is how do you square that circle if China wants to reshape global governance to make it more accessible and more suitable for China? What does that mean for the freedoms of the rest of the world? You could say China does not impose its system anywhere, and that's true as far as we have seen, but China actually doesn't know what the world would look like if China were the leading superpower. And I think through the technology war that is taking place, we're looking at the core of the fight for leadership in the global sphere. This is not about what religion or what ideology any country follows. It's about what are the rules of the game for the world.
Gong, you talked earlier about some of those countries that the U.S. has been involved in, and China, they have some allies also that are against the United States here. What do you think who will China try to muster on their side to counter some of these moves by the United States? Who are China's main allies at this point?
Well, I mean, overwhelmingly, I think China's allies and friends and countries that are maintaining good relationships are also friends of the United States. I mean, look at the map, even in the Middle East, for example, we have more friends here that are really close allies of the United States, and I don't think that's a problem. I think the issue about China being a challenge to the global governance is also overblown. I think Chinese government has specifically said that it has no intention of toppling or dethroning the existing global governance order, international order. On the contrary, it says that it wants to cooperate with all parties to maintain and keep the current order, which was basically established after the Second World War, led by the United States. And I think what China is asking for is just a fair a voice, a fair share of influence, a equal seat at the table. That's all it wants. Given China's economy, given China's influence in the economic sphere, and I think it's a totally legitimate question to ask.
Right, Gong, I want to ask you specifically about one point there that you talked about other countries. There is one specific area where China is accused of trying potentially to change the status quo there. That is Taiwan. We see they've increased now their mandatory military service from 4 months to 1 year. That's an announcement of something that they intend to do because of the potential threat from China. What do you see as the future of Taiwan, and do you see potentially the United States trying more to get involved in the defense of Taiwan as kind of a part of the proxy war, so to speak, with China here?
Who are you asking?
I asked Gong, but anyone can jump in and see what they think about that.
So the military response to the situation in Taiwan is solely because of the wholesale, whole of government, whole of a society direction movement towards independence. And I make an analogy here. Suppose the Palestinians in the West Bank are buying weapons from other countries and they're arming themselves. What would Israel do, right? So it's a very similar situation. Taiwan is not recognized by the majority of countries around the world.
Those situations.
Well, I think
absolutely.
I can understand. I can understand
those two.
Well, I can understand Israel's perspective on this issue, but let me also tell you the Chinese perspective on this issue. The Chinese government doesn't recognize Taiwan as a sovereign country, as a majority of the countries as United Nations members do not recognize Taiwan as an independent country, including Washington, including the United States, including every country in the European Union, other than the Pentagon in Europe. There are only about 14 countries, and I think most of them you probably won't be able to find them on a map that still regard Taiwan recognize Taiwan as a diplomatic relationship. But this is not a sovereign country here. It's historically part of China.
All right,
and that.
Yeah, I want to. Okay, so both Carice and Rabbi Spitz, 1 minute response to the argument regarding Taiwan and how much these measures are connected to what's going on in Taiwan.
I can agree that Taiwan is part of China from the people feeling, but it's absolutely different from the Palestinians and the Jewish people in Israel, because Israel and Palestine, let's say not Palestine, it is Judah and Samaria. It is the heart of the Israel country. It's like Jerusalem for us. So it is part of us anyhow.
I totally understand that. I respect that. I respect your view.
Arab people came from outside, from outland to these areas.
I totally respect your view.
Absolutely different.
I totally respect your view, Rabbi. I totally respect your view, okay? But there's also I'm just telling you, there's also a Chinese view from mainland China.
I know. I agree with
very
you.
differently. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the difference is Chinese people and Taiwan people, both of them feel the same
conflict
people,
between Taiwan and mainland China. And the United States would like to maintain the status quo. It has put a lot of effort into that. Its policies are directed towards that. And where there is tension between the United States and China on Taiwan, it looks like the United States is working to take steps to lower that tension, because the status quo is the best for all sides at this point.
All right. Setting tons of arms
We're going to get
it's not lowering tension.
We have to go out for a break. 2-minute break. We'll continue the conversation. Don't go anywhere.